there's a reason I don't normally talk about Pokemon. And that's because it's Pokemon!
And hey, that's not a knock to it. I love Pokemon. Since the date when my mom got me Pokemon Red and Blue and a Game Boy Color for Christmas in 1998, and then won a copy of Pokemon Stadium in April of 2000 that my stepbrother and I played on his Nintendo 64 after he got one of those for Christmas in 1999. I love the games. There's not a generation yet I haven't participated in playing in some form.
Well, not so much Alola, unfortunately. Time got away from me and I never finished playing Pokemon Sun and Moon. I hate it when my personal life and my interest time sinks clash, so I can't do that crap. Why didn't I finish Sun and Moon in 2016? Recording for Persona 4's game footage ran very long. I love Persona 4, but its time sinks were hell. 2017 onwards as well has had too many complications for me to have yet gone back to those either. And it didn't help that, unlike the generations prior to it, I felt like the game was rather aimless with a personal goal. I was enjoying what I did play, but in general my enjoyment of Pokemon regions depends as much on exploration of the regions as it does what I can recruit and do. Not having a big post-game, for example, isn't something I knock a game for if I enjoyed the main story and traveled through it. Which is likely why, without the gym leader goal progression system, I just lost interest in playing Sun and Moon. Hell, Pokemon's one of the very few franchises that features a game overworld, and I don't dislike it for it.
So, yeah, I really like Pokemon, but the reason I don't talk about it is everyone talks about it. There are multiple YouTube channels going over every minutia or battle tactic. You've got numerous streamers playing any given entry at any given time. The entire concept of the Nuzlocke and Pokemon Hard Mode, and the numerous Let's Plays and webcomics chronicling those journeys.
My favorite of the Nuzlocke comics, by the way, not including the original, obviously, is Myths of Unova by Kai Nim. You can find it on DeviantArt. It's really well written.
Or the hilarious insanity that continues to be Twitch Plays Pokemon. Comic reviewers covered the adaptations of it into manga or single-issue graphic novel form. Numerous people nitpicking and critiquing everything from an episode-by-episode breakdown, or people being more casual and just talking about the movies.
Hell, I even joined in on that last one to an extent. I'm infrequently a guest on Old School Lane's Casual Chats podcast, and I was part of the one that discussed all of the movies made as of 2017. Please check the link. OSL's host, Patricia Miranda, is very nice. But yeah, that's pretty much my reason for not jumping in. Most of what could be said has been said or is being said. I'm not the biggest channel, but damn it, I'm dedicated to niche audience appeal stuff and expressive recap and analysis of my interests in a vacuum. I feel it helps me stay more distinct as I talk about things that just fall through the cracks that nonetheless deserve attention, or I'm eviscerating things that deserve it which people didn't for whatever reason.
But hey, stuff I wouldn't normally cover? That's what Patreon requests are for. And this one comes from Garak Weevil, who asked I talk about just anything Pokemon related.
And well, yeah, I could have just copped out and done any of the movies to make things easy on myself, or discussed the complete god-awful clustercrap ending to the Kalos Regions anime that thematically, narratively undermined going into the Sun Moon series without pissed everyone off unnecessarily and ended up losing viewers to what actually is the best saga of the anime to date, or even gone back to talking about a writer I've bashed in the past for his incompetence who has been involved in the anime that has actually written a lot of good episodes for Pokemon's anime series. But I decided to go back to something else outside of Alola that I played, but just never finished.
Pokemon Colosseum, released in 2003, was Game Freak's way of getting around the Generation 2 to 3 trade barrier. While some Gen 2 Pokemon were found in Pokemon's Ruby, Sapphire, and later Emerald, and the original Gen 1 remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green had the Savai Islands just populated with them, it didn't account for everything you were able to find in Pokemon's Gold, Silver, and Crystal, that due to programming changes between game generations, could not be traded up into Gen 3 games onwards. Instead, some of them, including Gen 2's legendaries, were sequestered to be obtained here and in this game's 2005 sequel, Gale of Darkness, to completely fill the roster. The games, written by Kazunori Oreo, were the first Pokemon games to try and put the entire Pokemon experience on a television console system instead of a handheld. While I love the Stadium games, well, my stepbrother and I spend most of our time playing the mini-games, or just battling crap in the stadium. You didn't play an actual character, didn't get money, didn't collect items, and they just weren't RPGs. Colosseum, however, does the full gamut of the experience, albeit in a shortened, less region-size heavy form because, well, GameCube disc size limitations.
Now, this is going to seem like an off-topic tangent initially. It does tie back into things, though. But I have a weird relationship with Pokemon Generations 1, 2, and 3. Primarily because I'm that original Gen 1 player that doesn't actually care about the Kanto or Johto regions.
Hell, I'm that rare player that actually hates Johto. Like, I feel there's nothing to really do here that's in any way memorable, and the region itself has problems with regard to leveling and content balances, and those were not made any better in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. And why Generation 4 overall ended up the worst game generation for Pokemon after the flop of imbalance that was the Sinnoh region. Even if Sinnoh did give us some cool stuff like Lucario, another of my favorite Pokemon, and had post-game content. But post-game content that I just found a major annoyance.
Case in point for why Gen 4 is the holder for that worst Gen title and people bitching about the gens after it being self-important idiots. I will never forgive Sinnoh for the Honey Tree mechanic. Do you have any idea how long it took me to get a female Combi which I could evolve into Vespiquen? Until I got to Route 12 in fucking Unova when I played Black and White! That's how awful the catch rate truly is for that goddamn thing, and the other Pokemon you could only get from that game mechanic. So I don't even dignify complaints about female Sandalid encounter rates in Alola, as at least you could grind through those random encounters in an hour with no problem. Hell, I barely played Sun and Moon, and I got one! Say what you will about the idiosyncrasies of any specific Pokemon generation, the worst and most obnoxious encounter and play conditions or acquisition limitations will always be in Sinnoh, and by proxy, Gen 4 overall. All of you complaining about experience or quality of life changes in Gens 5, 6, 7, and 8 you don't like? This is why I don't dignify it. As you forgot everything that was bad about the earlier games the latter ones got rid of, and with good reason.
Granted, I never had a problem with Whitney's infamous Miltank. Oh no, I'm that player that got screwed over by Faulkner and Bugsy. Yes, the first two gym leaders were a more obnoxious opponent than Whitney to me. The map layout annoys me. I can barely find anything worth catching as there's terrible type and encounter balancing, if it isn't just a last generation Mon or locked off by trade evolving, which is the form of evolution that I hate the most. And while everyone likes that we can go back to Kanto and see what's changed, it's the game gen that people love, just so they can go back and do again the old stuff from Kanto.
And ever since, people have wanted a Pokemon game that sandboxes together all of the generations. And hey, I would be for that too if they did it. I would love to revisit and be able to catch everything by traveling everywhere, even the regions I don't care for. Maybe lock off cross-region trading by having a required level limit to use a cross-region Pokemon until you collect all regions' badges, especially if it has anything to do with the legendaries. It just irritates me that Kanto's the only one to get that, and it's had the most remakes and revamps as well. I am sick of going there! Seriously, I could literally not give a damn about going back to Kanto if you paid me. Not after the Go games. Which is another example of a really bad Pokemon game by its end.
So, yeah, unlike a lot of people, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal actually killed my interest in Pokemon originally not long after its release in late 2000. It wasn't until 2005 that I got back into it when I caught one of the Hoenn movies on Marathon on Cartoon Network and decided to check out what Gen 3 had, and bought Pokemon Emerald. Emerald and Hoenn by proxy has since become my favorite Pokemon game and region, and is the one I've revisited more than any other, and has more of my favorite Pokemon in it than any single generation beyond it. From all the starters which I adore, to Raltsline and Absol, to just fun, quirky stuff in the region that I appreciate and noticed here more than I ever did before this. Pokemon types actually started to be far more balanced and supported and mixed up. Trade evolution was far dialed back, but still had some annoying ones as other new means of evolution started to be introduced. And honestly, I love Hoenn as a region for all the fun nooks and crannies it has to explore that felt more thought out than Johto ever was. You know, some things could get a bit silly, like the work you had to put into getting the Reggies, or the crap with the heart scales for move tutoring, and so on and so forth. But I think Emerald was the best version for the games, as it allowed for the amalgamation of the individual stories of its predecessor versions Ruby and Sapphire by merging the arcs of its two competing antagonist teams and their respective goals of expanding the land or sea to support the flourishing of life, and how that all then goes AWOL.
And yes, I do enjoy Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, just not as much since there's no third version that amalgamates the two stories, which was really desperately needed. Had they released, like, Epsilon Emerald, I would have been over the moon. But I will agree with everyone who was disappointed that due to programming differences between Gen 3 onwards games and the original two generations, that Pokemon from the Game Boy games could not be exported once again up another generation ladder to the Game Boy Advance games. It's only really been something fixed in recent years with the Pokemon Bank and the 3DS game re-releases.
But unlike a lot of people, I actually did trade up my Pokemon from Red version to my copy of Silver, and it was a freaking pain. As you had to catch a crap ton of just disposable Gen 1 Pokemon you could find in Gen 2, and then trade them into the Gen 1 cartridge to trick that game into seeing it as just another normal trade from a cartridge in the same generation. Do you have any idea how long that took me? It was days. Literal full days. It would have taken less time to Game Shark in a new, fresh catch, as all that was back then was entering a 12-digit code to mod the encounter.
And people thought the PAL Park in Gen 4 was bad. But obviously, there was a reason people were pissed off as, well, not only did we put in the effort to catch everything legitimately, we put the time and effort into training everyone. We became invested in the teams we made and the Pokemon we used in the games, and most people wanted to continue carrying them over.
Hell, as an example of this, when I first played Emerald, I loved the starters so much, I bred them like mad. Not for the likes of competitive team making, but simply so I could have a brand new level 1 baby Pokemon egg of them to adventure with down the line. And I still have all of those.
And in Gen 6, when they did the Mega Evolution stuff, I Pokemon banked in straight away my Torchics, and while I played my first round in Kalos with a special promotional Torchic that used Speed Boost, I then bred it immediately into the line. So when the whole remakes happened with Oras, I could experience it all again with those Torchics I bred all that time ago from my first one. That's the kind of investment and legacy people wanted to experience across the generations with their fuzzy, scaly, amphibious, or plant-natured friends. And that is the Pokemon appeal at its core.
I think that's why that one post from the beginning of Kalos about two friends and the Absol between them caught on so heavily with people and made the rounds when discussions of Mega Evolutions began. Not just because of the Angel Wings Mega Absol gained from that, but how it represented the enduring relationship and legacy one has with friends now gone. That legacy and wanting to retain what you put the effort into gain is powerful.
So yeah, can't trade from Gen 2 to Gen 3? A lot of people were understandably irritated. That inability foreshadowed why so many stupidly decried the Gen 8 games when the development team told everyone months in advance that due to production constraints, Sword and Shield couldn't import every prior gen Pokemon since there's over 800 of them, as had happened before. But needless to say, the backlash they've gotten for not being able to do something because of programming work or time constraints, even though they eventually worked to restore that in downloadable updates, it was stupid then and it was stupid now.
Hell, I'm a Digimon fan, and there's over 1,000 of those. But the video games about the franchise almost always default to all the ones that have gotten featured as main series protagonist partners or their major enemies, and rarely feature their really cool esoteric stuff, or only goes about featuring it once or twice before it's entirely gone. Do you have any idea how long I've wanted a Digimon story game featuring X-Evolution variant Digimon? Ones that don't naturally feature the X-antibody like Dorumon? Hell, Bandai of America was so bad at importing those that not only did they skip ones on a cross-game arc, but intentionally tried to exclude Digimon from them despite them being part of the core game data, just to try and make them pay to access DLC when they weren't originally. And it blew up in Bandai of America's face for them trying to pull that duplicitous bullshit, as they had promised before the game released that all content that was part of the game's DLC in Japan would be included in the base core game upon purchase. And the exclusion of content that was actually part of the core game in Japan was the source of game bugs in the Western release of the damn game. They did that ripping out of it for paid DLC that badly. This specifically happened with the original PS4 and PS Vita releases of Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, with their previous statements thus of course becoming an outright lie upon the English release of it. And fans aware of this were justified in calling them out on that, as it wasn't until months later that they actually then patched in what they'd held back after fan outcry got what was supposed to be part of the core game from the start of the Western release to be returned. Pokemon by proxy has been much better off on that, and never actually lied about game content once.
So spoiled brats complaining about not being able to import a Dunsparce, made up lies about the game quality by falsifying evidence, and harassed game devs because of that and other issues even though they were told about them far in advance, and it was free patched in DLC later to fix the next issue you had because the only reason it wasn't originally included was because of time constraints and overworking the staff? Yeah, I have no sympathy for you or patience to entertain your whining or lies, as the Pokemon development team was upfront about the problems they had, admitted flat out and were transparent about it, so you weren't surprised by it and didn't try to scam you over and sell it back to you later like other companies have with the exact same niche of monster training games. Seriously, I'm still pissed at Bandai of America over what they did to Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. So, you literally crapped on one of the few game companies out there right now who didn't try once to lie or scam you out of your money, and ignored every quality of life improvement that had been made.
But back on point, Colosseum was one of the ways in which Game Freak and Nintendo tried to do right by fans and remedy that. And it did so, but in a misguided way, as a lot of us didn't care about the issues of completing the Pokédex again. It was about retaining a memento of a specific life experience and connection we had built with the Mon we had trained to battle the elites of a region, and wanting to bring it along with us further in our lives and experiences in a new setting. Especially since the battery life of a Game Boy game meant that eventually the internal cartridge battery would die, and the Pokemon stored there along with it. They tried. They legitimately tried. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't going to make up the difference for many who got invested in that way.
I think the reason this game originally sold as well as it did was for two reasons. One, it's freaking Pokemon. The name brand recognition alone makes almost any game of the franchise sell, even if an indie professional reviewer published under a game magazine thinks a remake of a game has too much water. And two, the day one release of the game came with a promotional disc that gave you freaking Jirachi, the adorable legendary chibi mascot of Gen 3. I love Jirachi, but since I came in late, I always Game Shark triggered that acquisition encounter to get one. What, do you know how rare it was to encounter event Pokemon in the original 3 game generations? It was almost literally impossible in a country outside of Japan to find any type of promotional gift event before the Nintendo DS gave us internet access and Wi-Fi capabilities. Event encounter legendaries were the only thing I Game Sharked in Gen 3.
At the very least here, you get to play and experience the life of this guy, Wes.
Who the heck is Wes?
Still pissed that show got cancelled. Glad I got to use that clip in context for once. But yeah, who is this guy and why should we care?
Well, the flaw and feature in Pokemon's gameplay is that you, yourself, are the protagonist. While you have a framework for the backstory of a character by meeting their parents, have a set up friendship or rivalry with other characters, well, you get out what you put in, as it is you who are playing you. The Pokemon Adventures manga is actually the biggest source of characterization for the various male characters, since the protagonist girls for the regions usually end up represented as Ash Ketchum's travel companion since the Hoenn years.
Speaking of the anime, I appreciate May, but Serena is best girl. Suck it, Misty shippers. I haven't even watched the anime since I saw a bit of Hoenn, and I know that about Kalos.
But that is ultimately the problem with Wes here. We are told things about him, but he has no individual character. Now, normally this isn't a problem with Pokemon. Again, it's a series about your own personal self-insert being in control to decide how you do things. But I felt it a lot more here due to how we get involved in this region as, well, Colosseum's more on rails than other games. And for the story to work, Wes needs to have character, as a lot of this game ties into backstory we never see, so should have been expressed in other forms we never get. Even though we do get a bit, and you can infer some other details if you need to. Wes is a former member of Team Snag'em, a villain team specializing in Pokemon theft, who having a crisis of conscience betrays the team and steals their prototype Snag machine, a device that allows the user to throw Pokeballs at already captured Pokemon and take them for themselves.
While it's not much addressed, when a Pokemon is captured it becomes, well, registered to the Pokeball, thus making it impossible under normal circumstances to capture another person's Pokemon in a Pokeball. Means of deregistering a Pokemon from a trainer's balls exist. Ergo, the many Pokemon teams that make a business out of stealing and reselling them, and the ability to release them from boxed PCs. Or the trainer Paul from the Diamond and Pearl anime, who had a policy of catch and then release the weak ones. The capture machine West just stole gets around that, and converts any Pokeball into one that can steal another trainer's Pokemon and immediately make it their own. This is why West needed to find characterization far more than any other Pokemon protagonist. In the other games, we are experiencing everything at the same time the character is. Here, we're starting in media res of his story, and as a result don't understand the choices he's made to bring him to the point he is at. The closest we get into him having actual trustable character is in how he raised for himself an Espeon and an Umbreon as his starting Pokemon, who only come to exist by maxing out one's friendship with Eevees at day and night respectively. You can't mistreat a Pokemon and max out one's friendship with it to get it to evolve. It just doesn't work. Granted, some bad guys in Pokemon have Pokemon you can only max friendship with to get, but as Jesse and James in the anime have long shown with their partners, just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you are a bad guy.
With the theft of the machine, West heads out with his Pokemon partners Espeon and Umbreon into the desolate desert region of Ouray, one purportedly to the north of Kanto and Johto, but it's never specifically been stated where it is in all relativity to the other mainland regions. Here, Pokemon rarely exist in the wild, thus pre-caught Pokemon are imported en masse from Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn.
Thus explaining where Team Rocket got the main glut of its business.
And as a result, those with Pokemon are few and far between, and there's basically little use for Pokeballs. Hell, the only place that sells any as the game goes on is this bartender that set himself up in the rusted out hulk of a train engine that's still on the disused tracks that used to connect to the other regions. Honestly, the setting of this place is actually worthwhile and a good one for exploring, as it's almost dystopian in how hollow and barren the place is. It makes for a different type of story than the other Pokemon games, where each region is not only stable governmentally and culturally, but otherwise thriving, and thus makes the various teams even more anarchistic by comparison to be stirring up trouble. Ouray? Well, if an evil team comes in, they're not going to face much if anything in the way of competition, as even travel between towns is an ordeal out in the desert. Case in point, as we move to the next town in the region, we encounter the main enemies of the game, Team Cypher, in an ongoing act of abduction. We kick their asses in a Pokemon battle, and free their would-be victim, Ruri. Ruri, as it turns out, grew up in a gate village, which bears a shrine to Selby in it, and due to her regular interaction with it, she has gained the ability to see a malevolent aura around certain Pokemon, which she was investigating, and thus led to her capture as people are not supposed to be able to see that.
These shadow Pokemon, as they're obviously called, have suffered extreme abuse to turn them all into fighting machine weapons. The process obviously isn't gotten into as, well, animal abuse, but the reason Ruri can see it is shadow Pokemon, like a real sentient being would, have closed themselves off emotionally and locked up their hearts, and then aggressively act to defend themselves with everything they have, even if it ends up destroying them over time in order to do so.
This likewise expressed thematically by every Shadow Pokemon having one of their moveset overridden with the move Shadow Rush, a technique that is neither weak nor strong to anything, so always does decent damage, but causes the Pokemon using it to suffer recoil damage. The Shadow effect also drags out all of the Pokemon's individual malevolence, harnessing the negative feelings from what was done to them to enter a hyper mode that further enhances their power and ability in battle. But as a consequence of what was done to them, the Shadow Pokemon are stagnant, unable to gain experience points in the realm of the game's mechanics, and by proxy of what that experience metaphysically represents, unable to grow and develop in any way as a living being. The only way to then have them gain experience is to take them from their owners and help them get over that. Help them move past their trauma and recover to be their whole, true selves again.
There was this whole dust-up in American politics years ago, with animal rights activists making a big stink about how Pokemon endorsed and promoted animal cruelty, and ultimately culminating in the organization PETA, which has been proven in court to abuse and murder animals at its animal shelters instead of finding them homes, or painlessly euthanizing them, to create a farcical Pokemon clone, making it seem like the trainers were driving their Pokemon into pit fights. The entire argument was, of course, always complete bullcrap. Pokemon battles were always just XPs of animals just playing or roughhousing, only taken to higher extremes because those beasts have all manners of crazy superpowers. The trainers are just that. Animal trainers that bring out a Pokemon's best as they want to compete and show off in a sense of pride in being good at things. They can get hurt, yeah, but it's always shown in the media that the trainers, the good ones, care about their Pokemon like their family. That's the purpose of all the medical centers, to help them recover from injury and make sure they're all okay. So the argument always rang hollow, but it stuck around so long that it reached the point Game Freak and Nintendo in turn made transparent XPs of these idiots and their hypocritical agenda into Team Plasma and the Black-White games. But even before that, Colosseum was their first round rebuttal to that, as this is what actual animal cruelty in the Pokemon world would look like to turn them into enslaved fighting machines, and it reflects the real-world ways in which trauma in both humans and animals is expressed.
So obviously you can see where the plot of the game goes from here. With the help of Ruri, you take back the abused shadow Pokemon from trainers, some oblivious to the abuse, others accessories to their malice, treat them properly by carrying them around with you in the party, and nurture them back into their original state by over time purifying them of all the negative experience they've had with positive reinforcement and cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically exposure therapy, to desensitize them over time via regular battles instead of just getting them stuck in a hypersensitive combat state. Hell, the hyper mode the shadow Pokemon enter directly parallels the hyper-awareness, aggressive attitudes, and lashing out of those who are suffering post-traumatic stress disorder and panic attacks caused by trauma to a T. Through this, you are allowed to over time open their hearts, free them from the shadow influence, and with the assistance of a Celebi Shrine in Ruri's Agate Village, throw off the influence completely.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of problems with Shadow Pokemon despite how genius it is, both as a story narrative and a microcosm of psychology as expressed through gameplay mechanics. Specifically, it is a pain to not only catch them, but train them enough to get to the point where you can free them from being Shadow Pokemon. Now, this difficulty does reflect how difficult it is to overcome abuse and trauma in real life, but for the reason you're even collecting the Shadow Pokemon, it is kind of an irritant.
Let's first touch on why it's difficult to catch them. Every Pokemon battle in Colosseum is a double battle. Now personally, I liked double battles when they introduced the mechanic in Generation 3. I usually ended up making some damn effective teams that utilized the mechanic in the midst of my usual teams. One of my favorites being pairing my Swampert and Salamence together, so Swampert could just mass use Earthquake to kill everything, while Salamence sent out aerial volleys. Hell, have my Salamence use Fly, and avoid damage from surfing as well. Have Blaziken learn Sunny Day as it was faster, and I'd have my slightly slower Sceptile then start one-turn casting Solar Beam to sunburn my enemies.
Speaking of, why does Solar Beam not cause the burn status ailment? Solar Beam is literally stored solar energy. It makes sense to me that anything using Captain Sunshine should burn you.
Captain Sunshine?
But yeah, double battles. Unless you KO everything the opposing trainer has to do it, you're always battling something else on top of not working to counter the attacks coming out of the Shadow Pokemon you're battling. While you're collecting Shadow Pokemon, very few of them will have the best techniques I use for catching Pokemon, specifically anything that causes sleep, and I could not find a single thing that had the technique False Swipe, which would have allowed me to attack until they only had 1 HP left to then try catching it. Coupled with Shadow Rush causing them to hurt themselves whenever they attack, and you have the recipe for resetting your game a lot if you want to get every single one of them. And just hoping you remember to save at each one of the save way stations before each and every encounter with one, so you know you get to keep it.
And, well, if you want some of the game's extras, you'd want to go out of your way to catch every one of them as you encounter them. At least when the game first released. As if you capture every Shadow Pokemon, you're then given the chance to capture Shadow Ho-Oh in the post-game. Yeah, I actually don't have any footage of me doing that, as about 20 hours in, I just started saying screw it to capturing the Shadow Pokemon, as it was just needless effort onto something I was already finding tedious. So by the time I found out I had to catch every Shadow Pokemon to get Ho-Oh at the end, it was too late to go back. I mean, the original point of wanting to catch the Shadow Pokemon was long gone.
I got Pokemon Colosseum originally in 2007 on a whim in a bargain bin, as Emerald got me greatly back into all of that. I wanted to fill up my Pokedex completion, but gave up on it originally about 10 hours in because of this game's tedious grind and lack of level balancing, and learning that I could not trade the Gen 2 Pokemon to Gen 3 unless I freed them all from Shadow Influence first, and that I would need to get a copy of Ruby or Sapphire to trade them to, as Colosseum's incompatible with Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green. And just the first step of that, freeing Pokemon from Shadow Influence, takes forever. Each Shadow Pokemon you put your time into freeing ends up about a half dozen levels behind the needs of the game's level progression, and the experience gained back after that isn't as equivalent as you might think, as you then need to capture new Shadow Pokemon as you encounter them to keep up with the difference in the level gap, thus thrusting freeing the others to the wayside.
Though the Hyper Mode mechanic is a bit of a fix to that, as if the Shadow Pokemon enter Hyper Mode, you can use the Call option in a battle, and doing so snaps them out of their Hyper State and guts about a quarter to half of a bar on the Shadow Influence gauge. Once more reflecting how positive reinforcement and therapy helps to cull the influence over you of negative impulses. But the reason you'd also need to take the time to purify every single Shadow Pokemon of the Shadow Influence, well, if you wanted to trade the Gen 2 Pokemon you would get from all this over to Ruby or Sapphire for completing the national Pokedexes, then they'd need to be in a natural gameplay state, as Shadow Rush is not a move in any mainline game's game data. I can't even imagine how long that took people to do when, well, like you could in Gen 2, you could just Game Shark yourself for an encounter with them.
Not help that you don't get to a gate village where you can finally free all the shadowed Pokemon you've opened the hearts of until the point your Espeon and Umbreon are in their 40s. While everything else you've bowled is either a Shadow Pokemon that will take forever to unshadow, or a level 30 Pokemon you just spent forever re-leveling to match everything else at a huge disadvantage. No joke, I spent 12 hours just level grinding after I got my preferred team unshadowed. And it's because of that my final team ended up just featuring Hoenn's legendary Dogs of Entei,
which I nicknamed Dan with 2 N's because, of course, that needed to be done.
Suicune and Raikou, so because all legendary Pokemon have by default higher stat totals than non-legendaries. The Bayleaf, the Meganium I rescued very early in the game that spent most of the game in my party, and my starter Espeon and Umbreon simply because they'd constantly been racking up the experience and effort values. Everything else is otherwise mostly a waste of time to invest in due to their lesser stat ratings or type disadvantages. Though unfortunately this game doesn't deal the best with normal or dark types, which were unfortunately numerous in this game. I really could have used a fighting type on this team, is what I'm saying. Especially since the Makihito is actually the first Shadow Pokemon you're able to capture, and I didn't make much use of it. But unfortunately the number of poison types I'd fight meant I couldn't nix Espeon. Not having a core trio of water, fire, and grass types in a Pokemon game is always foolish. And Raikou filled a damage niche with it learning and doing excellent damage with Thunder, due to it being chained together with Suicune's Rain Dance to always hit with 100% accuracy. No joke, Rain Dance, Thunder, and Sunny Day Solar Beam were wrecking balls back in Gen 3, and likewise are here as well.
But wait! What about trading on Umbreon then? The strongest attacks it learns is Shadow Ball and Hyper Beam, and those are only from TMs. It can't have anything that strong otherwise for rapid defeat of enemies, so why keep it around? Well, that's an infamously bad decision to make for anyone who's done it. Why? Umbreon is the team's tank!
There were literally over a dozen times in this game that I got ambushed by a difficulty spike, ended up facing Pokemon literally 10 levels above mine, usually from the Pokemon of enemy bosses. And Umbreon tanking the strongest things they could dish out was the only reason I could even survive. This is not a joke. If the chips were down and I was stuck fighting an overpowered boss class trainer or one of the Team Cypher admins, then Umbreon would be my last-ditch means to survive attacks that would otherwise one-hit KO the 3 legendaries that made up my party. Even Megadium, which are notorious for being beefy damage sponges among the starter grass types without the grass type standard pool of healing moves, didn't serve as well in those duties. To even think of replacing it in the party never crossed my mind. He legitimately earned his spot by surviving the worst everyone else could dish out.
So, yeah, a place for everything and everything in its place that all got locked up over time. Granted, the level disparity is kind of deceptive. If you've been training things properly and pay attention to the battles you're engaged in, then you can actually defeat Pokemon in this game that are 10 levels stronger than you. Some of them even 15 levels above if you're careful. But it's odd or possibly the developers rebalancing the difficulty curve of later game entries due to just how difficult it is to even level up here.
With no wild Pokemon and only so many Pokemon trainers in Ouray that exist, there aren't a lot of options to leveling your Pokemon, or even getting the battles to purify Shadow Pokemon. It's one-time encounters with Team Cypher's goons as you find them across the region, battling over and over again the circle of friends over in Pyrite Town who themselves get stronger as you both rebattle them, and as you go through story events, going through Mount Battle after you gain access to it in story events, and you can revisit this place at any time to earn more coupons for some of the game's TMs and hold item prizes, or from the titular Battle Colosseums peppered around the region. None of them, however, generate much in the way of experience, even the latest gaming enemies and bosses maxing out around 1,000 experience. But most of the time your combat encounters will generate no more than 300 a battle. It's not enough for the volume of battling you were doing, especially since you were stuck double battling, meaning that experience is getting split.
So yeah, bottom line, grinding is a pain. You'll be spending more than 2/3 of your entire playthrough doing it, and that is just to get your team to level 50 to face the end boss's team. And you start with Espeon and Umbreon at level 25, and everyone else higher than that. That averages out to about a level an hour collectively, give or take the ones you were getting at the higher levels. And it took me just 15 hours of nothing but level grinding everyone before I got Entei, Suicune, and Raikou up the 10 levels I needed to reach the end of the game, and they all started at level 40. To say nothing about the rest of my party.